Okay, now we're recording. So I'm going to give a brief introduction, and then Kay is going to do a PowerPoint to sort of explain everything, and then we're going to have plenty of time for questions. That sound okay to everybody?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and because we're recording this to post, I'm going to be a little bit more sort of formal to make sure I really say everything I'm supposed to say here. So here we are. So welcome to the 2022-2023 Budget Information Question and Answer session. Before we get started into the details and the numbers, I wanted to tell you that the board is feeling really good about this budget and how it supports our priorities and sets us up well to move forward into our developmental ministry time. Despite all we have been through in the last years, we are managing to do well in staying connected, financially sound, and committed to our faith. Overall, we're a generous congregation, and we've had a successful pledge drive in that many people substantially increased their pledge this year. Most pledge units pledged, and we have a sound budget. I want to thank our pledge drive circle folks for their creativity, their focus on fun, and their very hard work. So thank you to Reverend Linda, Kay Frazier, Ann Salamini, Aksha Carrier, Jude Bias, Joanna Hickman, Marcia and Steve Brecker, Jim Gorman, Sandy Brooks, Linda Dukes, Laura Horn, Greta Dershimer, Beth Jager Landis, Kay Fraley, Sean Scally, Reverend Leah, Kathy Polly, Don Landis, Darius Mehta. Quite a group again. I also want to thank our dedicated finance committee. Not only are they superb with numbers, but they are wonderful at listening to the board, the personnel committee, and many other committees, understanding all the needs and bringing that together in a cohesive plan with a balanced budget. I believe that their commitment to the higher goals of the congregation and their good stewardship and responsible practices is building good feelings and trust. Many thanks to the Finance Committee, Marion Wendelin, who's the chair, Dub Webbink, Rosalie Samari, Gloria Morgan, and of course, Kay Frazier, who's the board treasurer and is ex officio. I especially appreciate Kay as such a wise and experienced professional. I'm grateful for how she can make complicated processes clear and transparent. One of our priorities moving forward in developmental ministry is to develop stewardship ministry to better understand the complete management of all our resources. Really important part of our stewardship ministry are caring for our resources, membership development, and fundraising. And I want you to know we've already created a facility rental team to work to build a program to increase the rental potential for our spaces. So as I said, the Finance Committee has done a wonderful job of bringing all our needs into a budget. They were able to set priorities for the 2022-2023 funding in conjunction with the board, and I wanted to let you know the priorities. So here are the priorities: to pay and support for a developmental minister. So we've been able to do that. Support for multi-platform services. Continued support for our ministries, community, and social actions. Fair pay for the staff based on the UUA recommendations. An increase in the contribution to the UUA annual program fund. Increased funding for buildings and ground reserves. And make a payment on our no interest loan. So that all said, I now leave it to Kay to explain how this all works with the numbers. And thank you very, very much for being here. I really appreciate you all taking time out of your evening to be with us. All right, Kay, you're on.
Thank you. So as Linda said, I also appreciate everyone being here. And actually, a couple of you have emailed me this week, and I appreciate eyes on the documents and questions. And that's so very helpful to know that folks are out there looking and paying attention and care about our stewardship ministry. So I'm going to do a PowerPoint. And because we have someone on the phone who can't see the screen, I'll go in a little more detail so that everyone is seeing the same thing and hearing the same thing. If you can hold your questions to the end of the PowerPoint, or even put them in the chat room, if you want to note something as we move along. The purpose of this presentation is not to go line by line item in the budget, but really to give an overview and explain how the line items are supporting the priorities that the Finance Committee and the board adopted as we move through this budget process. Also, we'll talk a little bit about the fundamentals of the budget and the future of what next fiscal year looks like in terms of some work that will happen and is already in progress. So let me get the screen up. Okay, everybody can see that, I hope.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So it was really important for the Finance Committee as we work through this. I'm not sure how to move. Let's see if I can move y'all. Yeah. Can everyone see the entire screen
Yeah.
now?
Yes.
It was really important for the Finance Committee as we work through this budget to align the priorities that the Board of Trustees established with the funding that we had available. It was also important that we propose a budget that is balanced. We also were looking at the impact of COVID on our revenue streams, particularly from this fiscal year. There's been a considerable negative impact. And so we wanted to reassure ourselves in the congregation that as we move forward, and if we have another COVID shutdown, that we're in a position to deal with potential loss of revenue streams. And it was very important for us to build on the path of financial stability. Stan and the Finance Committee and the board and the congregation did such good work in the past few years, and we wanted to continue on with that positive work. There's some good news and there's some bad news in this budget. And we had hoped that to fund all of those priorities that Pam listed out, that we would require a 5% increase in pledges. And when I say pledges, I mean the yearly pledges, but also the match donations that were made. In actuality, this fiscal year, our pledges did increase. They increased by 1.2%, not the 5%. But we did, that was very hopeful. So you can see that it went from 474 to 76 to $480 and $12. We also looked at the revenue projections specifically around rentals and events and are cautiously optimistic. And I'll talk more about that as we move forward in the presentation. In summary, our increase in projected revenues is an increase of 2.7% or 15,526 for the next fiscal year. We also have an increase in projected expenditures of 2.6% of an increase of 14,754. So I'd like to go over each of the priorities that Pam listed and talk about what's funded, what's not funded, or what is reduced in this budget. The developmental minister is funded. It's important to note that this is for 11 months salary and benefits. And it also includes a 1,000 contribution to the UUA Developmental Ministry Fund. You'll see that as a line item. That is a new line item for us, but it's a contractual obligation that we have with Reverend Tim. This is a fund that UUA manages to assist developmental ministers with sabbaticals. And you can see that the total package for the developmental minister is the $117 and $36. This budget also funds the salary increases for staff, and these were per the recommendations of the Personnel Committee. The increases brings all of our staff at least to 95% of the midpoint of the recommended salaries of the UUA. It's important to recognize that this is the midpoint of their salary range, not the upper point. So the goal was to get at least to 95 to 100% of midpoint. So the total cost, an increase in staff cost is $12,882. We're also supporting the dual platform, the Zoom services and video editing. Some of you may have seen some emails and some calls that went out at the end of the pledge drive because our pledge drive had fallen short to be able to fund this. So we sent out an extra call, and I'm so gracious to the congregation that people rose to that challenge and contributed so that we're able to fund this very, very important service ministry that we have. There are a few increases in line items. Most notably, there's an increase in grounds maintenance of $2,500. And this increase is due that we now have mowing and snow removal on contractual services. We had a volunteer over the past years that did the mowing for us and snow removal. Unfortunately, we lost Jim during COVID. So we have now contracted with the service to provide those services. We reached out, of course, to staff and made a very concerted effort to reach out to every committee and every group within our ministries to ask them what's funding they needed moving forward for the next fiscal year. Some of the committees did not need the funding that they've had in the past. Some asked for the same level of funding. We were able to fund all the requests from staff and the committees. And one notable increase from last year to this year is that we have increased funding for the pianist of $2,500 in the music program. We have a slight increase in funding for the buildings and grounds reserves, and that increased from $2,000 to $3,000. And we're making a $1,000 payment on the $40,000 unsecured loan that we received a couple of years ago from a congregant. These are some things that are reduced or not funded. Since we did not receive the 5% in pledges that we had hoped for, we were still lacking enough funds to fund all of those items that I just went over. So we talked to every full-time staff person and minister and asked them to reduce for this fiscal year their professional expenses. And all three, including Reverend Tim, agreed to reduce, not in totality, but reduce some of their professional expenses. Our practice is that professional expenses should equal 10% of their salary. With their agreement to reduce their expenses, that equated to a $12,500 savings. We were also not able to increase our UUA contribution, and that remains at $5,000. Our fair share contribution is $37,500. And we would have liked to have put a lot more money into the reserve funds, and we're only able to increase by that $1,000 that I just mentioned. We're also not able in this budget to replace the HVAC system in Summit House. It's on its last leg, and Sean has been able to get estimates of to replace that system of $15,000 to $17,000. And we would have liked to have made much more than a minimal payment on our unsecured loan. And we're only able to fund the $1,000 this coming fiscal year. I don't want to go through the entire program budget, but I did want to point out just a few things. And this is our total income. And you'll see that we're still heavily dependent on pledges, on the pledge income. And that's 80%. And our other, which includes a social action, so that's a pass through, but we're still not heavily dependent on our other incomes, which includes rentals, it includes special event fundraising, it includes B&B and some other more minor other incomes that we have. But I want to come back to this at a later point in the presentation. Also, I'd like to point out that our staff is still a huge chunk of our expenses. One of the things that I'd like to note is in the worship wedge here, we did put the $17,000 to support the dual service because we just felt like that was just instrumental in providing worship service. And I would say that next year, we certainly want to keep this chart in place in our program budget, but we would like to take this large chunk of the staff and distribute it out within our program budgets to create another slide, a new slide that shows more of the true cost of some of our programs. And let me give you an example. In our budget, the beloved community only recognizes $925 that we're putting towards that ministry. But in fact, both of our ministers, Reverend Leah and Reverend Linda, spend considerable time with the beloved community. And so we would like, as we move into the next fiscal year, to work with staff to be able to have a better understanding of how they spend their time and being able to allocate their staff time across these programs. So some recommendations. This budget came with recommendations to the board from the Finance Committee. And one is to embrace this idea of stewardship ministry. It's actually an idea that Reverend Linda has spoken to us about several times. And it's just not about pledges and fundraising. It's about caring for our buildings. It's about caring for our grounds. It's about managing budgets. It's about caring for our endowment, trying to fully fund our reserve funds and caring for those funds. It's also about membership development. And it's also about fundraising, our rentals, our events, our pledge drive, our B&B, our script program, all those other things. So we may have thought about stewardship just as collecting money, collecting pledges, but it's much more of that. And we look forward to working with Reverend Timerson on developing the meaning of stewardship ministry and how we can strengthen our financial stability. To those ends, we would like to establish a fundraising event steering committee this coming fiscal year. And the role of this committee is to listen to ideas, look at the fundraising events that we've done in the past. Were they successful? Can we improve upon them? And help to identify leadership and volunteers to move forward with some of our existing events, but also bringing on some new fundraising events. Pam mentioned that we had already formed a facility rental team. I'm personally excited about this team. We're looking at not just policy and benchmarking fees, but we're looking at our marketing, our website, brochures, and how we can get the word out and improve our facilities to make them very conducive to facility rentals, with the caveat that we always place our congregational needs first. But we do think there's some capacity to bring in more revenue through our rentals. And I would say that and just in the past 2 months, Sean is fielding many, many more requests for rentals going into the next fiscal year. We also recommend that if we have COVID restrictions that require closing our buildings and leads to the loss of those revenue streams, that we take quick action to curb expenses, and that we keep a very, very close eye as we move into the next fiscal year on a monthly basis on revenues versus expenses. We'd also like to conduct a thorough mid-year review And if revenues have increased beyond projections, consider restoring funding to our full-time staff professional expenses and increasing the contribution to the UUA program fund and increasing the buildings and grounds reserves. And I want to thank everyone who's already participating in stewardship ministry. The people that did the pledge drive, people who donate, our fundraising activities, the finance committee, depositors, the facility rental team, the Glen Short Trust, our communications committee, our staff and volunteers that support rentals, our membership committee, the gardens and grounds folks, the board of trustees, our remembrance garden, and all the numerous volunteers. You can just see how many already in our congregation are involved in a stewardship ministry. So I would like to open it up for comments and questions. I have available, if we need to bring up the line item budget, if you have a very specific question, and also have available the program budget to bring up if you have a very specific question. I do want to touch on two things because folks have already emailed me. And one was that if you downloaded an early version of the program budget, there was a mistake on the income slide. The colors were reversed and it showed that we were fundraising 80% of our budget versus pledges. So if you downloaded and printed a copy, the new version is up and accurate. Also, Stan pointed out to me that, oh, I don't want to tell you, Stan has been a mentor, a friend, and a teacher coming on as a new treasurer. I can't thank him enough for being available, walking me through and Sean through on numerous occasions, the pass-throughs, the reserves, the bonds, so many things that I needed to learn. He did point out that in line 5504, that it should read 5644 instead of the amount. It's actually to our good. It was a mistake in looking at whether we would be able to buy it down or bonds. So let me open that up for questions now, comments. Marlene?
So I have a real concern about the revenue projections. I see historically over the 5 years that, you know, we're lucky to get $350,000 in pledge income. I don't see how the process came up with a budget of close to what is it, 460 something in pledge income.
All right, let me pull up the line item budget. Oops.
So I'm looking at like the 5-year budget versus actual spreadsheet.
Are you talking about this one, the 464012?
You know, the only thing that I have on this sheet, and maybe it got cut off, was the budget number for 21-22, which was 425 in the budget. And there's no actual number there because I guess it's not final yet.
Correct.
But all the prior years, you know, the 3 prior years, you know, the actual was about 350,000 in pledge income is what we ended up with. So I really have a hard time understanding how you're making these budgets that are projecting income that historically we don't support.
Well, in actuality, we're almost at over 400,000 in revenue and pledged income to date. And also
this
the
year?
budget number, and that the pledge is a real number. Now, Finance Committee uses 95% of the pledge donations as what the placeholder is in the budget. So we're already
Exactly a different
anticipating that
way.
we will not, so the pledges, that's a real number.
Well,
Um,
say, what is your projected actual pledge number? I mean, I know it's not final,
right.
but I mean, like right now you said it's 400. What do you think you're going to end up with this year as an actual pledge number?
I think we're going to be very, very close to our actual, and I'll tell you why.
That's
Because
425, right?
yes, and the reason that it's going to be very, very close is we have made a concerted effort to reach out to people to remind them of their pledges with letters, with emails, and just last week, letters went out to a lot of folks just to remind them. And we've seen already an increase in people honoring their pledges. And so
That's
the numbers have
still a
even
40,000.
increased.
Right. So if you take an estimated actual for this year,
Mhm.
budgeted number for next year, that's almost a $40,000 gap. So you're saying we're going to increase pledge actual by 40,000 next year.
Yes.
So pledges did increase
Right. But
from,
still, I mean, it's
the
like, what do
pledge
you
drive
think-
was successful and increased. I
we
think
also
Stan
know-
has his hand up, so.
Right. Well, we also know that those don't always, come true. We have a history as a congregation of not coming up to those numbers. So that's what just concerns me. So
Right.
my comment is, it feels like that number is overinflated. And I think all down your revenue stream, you guys have to my opinion, you have inflated numbers that are overly optimistic. Now you have to understand, I am a glass half empty person. Okay, that's who I am. That's my character. That's that whatever. That makes me uncomfortable. And I also think that from a expense point of view, you guys need to start thinking about how badly we're going to get hit by inflation. The electrical increases, the utility increases are projected for next year are almost 15%, if not 20%. And I don't know whether you guys have been able to kind of come back and look at that paper for the machines. Everything is going to go up like 15-20% next year. So that's where I leave it as my comment. I'm uncomfortable with this budget in that it seems to me like we're going backwards to a overly optimistic, inspirational kind of budget. And I understand the motivation for that. I'm not comfortable with that personally. As a member, I'm really uncomfortable with that. But anyway, I'll go ahead and listen to everybody else's comments.
Marlene,
Oh,
can I
Rosalie.
respond to Marlene?
Sure.
Well, I was
Marlene-
gonna,
Oh, you too. Okay.
yeah, I
you
was
wanna
gonna
go
reference
first?
some other things.
Stand first and then Rosalie.
I would like to respond to Marlene. Marlene, for almost 10 years, 8 years, we had no stewardship minister. We did not have a minister that got involved, that helped. We did not have any stewardship committees. We really did not. And
Yeah.
it just shows you in the last year or two, I think, what has to be done is being done, and it makes a difference. We got those pledges when people were asked. Those are real pledges. And it's because we have people who are involved in stewardship. That didn't happen in this congregation for at least 8 years.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I know that.
Yeah, and that was the other thing. That was what I was gonna reference too. Until this current fiscal year, the FY 22 fiscal year, we were working off of those pledge guesses from the rollover.
Mhm.
We did not have a real pledge drive until the one for the FY 22 budget. And that gets reflected in the amount of the pledges that has already been collected being higher than the previous percentages, just because it's based on those real numbers. And if you look at the current but FY23 budget, the amount that's actually being, the pledges is actually being increased by, just for current year pledges, is only $12,000. So it's not as big a jump there as you're expecting it to be. I trust these numbers, these pledge numbers, a whole lot more than I do any of the ones from FY21 or earlier. And I think that that's going to make a huge difference in the amount of the projected pledge we actually do collect. I think it's going to come very close to being real. When we used to have pledge drives back 10, 12 years ago, we would regularly end up collecting more than what had been pledged previously. I would like us to be able to get back to that. We're obviously not there yet because of COVID, I think. But in any case, I really do trust these pledge numbers.
What about the other revenue projections? I mean, a lot of those line items just seem out of balance.
Let me
with the
speak to
actual.
that. So
Yeah.
on facility rentals, it's at 15,000. We already have a commitment from an organization that brings in $12,000 in revenue. And it's a pretty firm commitment going into the next fiscal year. And the facility rental team is working diligently, and we'll have a report for the board in July of our preliminary findings. We will be developing new marketing materials. This comes back to Rosalie's point. We have to actively put teams together to pursue the other revenues. And the facility rentals team is in place, and we will be putting together one that focuses just on special events and fundraising through special events. Now, I would agree with you if we weren't doing any of these things. If we kept doing what we did and expecting different results, then yes, I would agree with you. But this is a new day, and we're going, and the congregation is already rallying around some of these efforts. And I think you'll see good results. I have to trust the congregation when they say that they're going to volunteer for these things and are volunteering for these things. And I have to trust the congregation when they say, I pledge this amount. I do agree with you that we need to do a better job of following up with those pledges and making sure that people are aware that they made that pledge and we're counting on that pledge. And as I said, letters have gone out this year. Things are in the newsletter. We're really putting an emphasis on that. So I did want to talk about utilities for just a second, and this question did come up. We received a small grant and a designated donation to make some changes in our buildings to help manage our utility cost. Part of that was changing out thermostats. And this was funding that did not come through our general fund budget. It came through a green grant and a congregate that donated money just for this. So we're making some changes in how we manage our utilities to better manage those costs. And Sean did go through every single line item, anticipating increases for the next fiscal year.
I guess my last comment is that what the one thing that worries me is that we bring in a developmental minister, and then we have a COVID, increase. We instead of planning for the best case scenario, we get hit with something that is not optimal, and that our board and our leaders and our new developmental minister has to spend so much time basically focused on stewardship and fundraising that he can't get to the really chronic developmental needs of this congregation. That to me is a potential downside that I think, I don't know. I understand it's really difficult to consider a more conservative approach, because that would mean cutting staff. That just, let's face it, we can't cut anything around here without realistically cutting staff. But, from my point of view, it's just, it's like that. I think, not being able to have him in a way come in, and if he's got and end up having to deal with like a fiscal crisis, or just our modus operandi of which we've been in the last 10 years of just having to spend so much time and energy on fundraising and all this stuff, then we just don't have the space and our board ends up getting so tied up into fiscal management that we don't have the space for all the other things that we have to do. So I don't know. I'm not, personally, I'm not comfortable with this budget. Is like I said, it's just too overly optimistic for me. And, but that's the way I come at it. I really wish the process would be a process that we could have as congregants more input earlier into this kind of thing, and maybe move the pledge drive back to December so that we could start looking at these numbers in January. And then, because it's like, okay, there's this meeting, you're voting on the board next week.
So
and
I
then
want to
the
just
conversation-
say that I want to make sure.
I'm just going to wrap up.
Okay,
So I'm in a position where I don't have something I can vote for. And that is the thing that irritates me more than anything else. So I'll just end my comment there.
really important points. Thank you.
I just wanted to say that I just blown away by all the work that everybody's put on into this, and that this budget makes more sense to me than a lot of other budgets that I've seen since I've been at the church. And I'll volunteer to be on the fundraising committee.
Thank you, Kathy.
That kind of thing. To the best of my ability in the near future.
I am writing your name down.
Okay.
So I did want to speak to just a couple of things that were brought up. Just to point that if we cut staff, we cut programs. And so I think when we talk about cutting our budget and cutting staff, that we also need to become prepared to suggest which program we're going to cut. And that's really the tough decision, is what program are we going to do without? Because staff is we cannot do our programs without our staff. So what if we were, and I'm not suggesting that we do, but Stan, you had a comment also?
In particular regarding the cutting staff part, the other thing that you may not be considering when you cut staff is what that's going to do to the income too, because there is not a single staff member that if they were let go, we would not end up losing some amount of donation because of that. And some of them, it might be more than what they're costing us. We ran into that when Eric and Christina both left. Each one of them we ended up having a reduction in income because they left. And I mean, it's unfortunately a political situation there in terms of the internal politics of the church, but it's also a reality. So you can't just say, okay, we cut staff, then we've got this much money left. We cut staff, we have this much money minus the money we're not going to be getting because they're gone.
I also wanted to touch on the idea about COVID and how much energy that takes. And that is so true. That's why in our recommendations, one of our top recommendations is that if we have COVID restrictions again, that we immediately start looking at the impact. And I'm talking about when that's the finance committee, the treasurer, and bringing that to the board, of course, with staff, immediately look at what that is going to do to our revenue streams and take quick action to curb those expenses, and be realistic about how COVID is impacting those streams. I will tell you that the Finance Committee was we had some discussion about these revenue streams, and how optimistic should we be, knowing what we've been through in the last 2 years with COVID.
I would like to add that the board has been considering whether we would maybe alter how we're handling safety with respect to COVID. When we first were managing COVID, our goal was to never have anyone get sick or be exposed. And I still think that that is a good plan, but what we're considering, and we're going to be talking about this at our board meeting later this month, is whether we can educate the rental people about what we feel like is the risk, but then while we're keeping our staff safe, let them decide how to handle the risk. What we've been doing is saying, we manage the risk, you must do this and this and this. So that will change things a little bit, I think. And then also, just as an aside, we're considering whether even if the rates go up when we stay at dual multi-platform services, we would say, here's what we think the risk is of coming. Everybody wears the N95, but we're going to keep allowing people to come in person unless things get really dire and we're forced to close. So even the board is trying to consider how we manage risk with COVID and keep people able to come and participate in church more in person at their own choice. I'm so glad we were able to get the funding to be able to continue the multi-platform services. And right now, the way we handle it is Sean works every Sunday, but we're looking to get other people trained to do that. So.
Other questions, comments? Linda?
I just want to thank everybody who's worked on this so hard to get a good budget, and I'm hoping it will come out to work out well. I know we don't know about COVID, and I tend to be more of a glass half full person, so maybe I balance out you, Marlene. But it looks like you've worked at it pretty hard to try to make it realistic, and I hope it works. So thank you for all that work. And I'm going to check out now.
Thank you for coming, Linda.
Welcome. Take care.
Bev, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on the cutting staff ideas, since I'm on personnel. That kind of hits home to me. And I look at the staff we have. We really don't have a lot of staff. We've got Leah, our development minister. We've got an administrator and an office assistant and an RE assistant.
Part-time.
And the director of music, who's only 17 and a half hours a week. So, I mean, it's not like we have a lot of staff that we could cut.
Well,
And
let me just-
I know they're all extremely busy.
Let me just make a comment, because I've served on the board. I've served on many
Yeah.
of the committees over the years. So you guys are not telling me anything that I don't already know, right? But what you've never done in personnel is look at our staff and our salaries compared to other congregations of our size or even larger size in the state.
Yeah,
of
that's what we
Virginia,
do.
You
Yeah,
know?
Yeah.
we
no,
do.
Yeah, that's
You
what we
know,
do.
well, nobody's ever informed the congregation of where we're at vis-a-vis other, like where are we versus, Fairfax and what is it? Warrington, Bull Run or whatever it is, or Richmond or whatever. Like where do we fit vis-a-vis them? And it seems to me we're in the like top percentile. Our pay is
No,
very high pay
no, it's not.
compared to others. And if it's not, that would be an interesting education for the congregation, because that would be like, oh, okay, we're in that mode. Because all I ever hear is the UUA recommended, which to me has always been a fantasy. I've always thought the
So-
UUA recommended numbers are ridiculous
So
compared
let's,
compared to stuff. So, I'm just saying, that would be my final point anyway.
Thank
But
you.
thank you guys for having this.
Donna, did you want to say something about that?
No, I know that we try really hard to get our staff up to a good point. I don't have the actual figures, but no, we compare, we were trying to get to where they're meeting the middle of the range, not the top. I mean, I think I wasn't prepared with numbers, and numbers are not my strong point. But I think we could pull together something that could show you where we are comparison to other. The UUA recommends by church size and by the I guess it's the income level range. I don't know exactly how
It's-
they do it, but
They use geo indexes, which look at the comparable job salaries in an area.
And
So-
I'll just say, I'm not interested in UUA numbers. I'm interested in real numbers of real congregations in Charlottesville and other UU congregations in the state. And-
I'll see if I can't
Where
get that.
we are relative to that.
yeah,
I would love to know, where we are relative to that.
that would be a good thing to know. I agree. That would be good.
Kathy, are you saying that you need to leave?
No, I have a question. I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but how much less are we paying Tim than we paid Eric? It seems like it's much less.
Oh, we finished paying him.
But we're not paying this guy as much as we paid Eric, right?
Yeah, Kathy, I'll need to go back and look. I'm not sure
And we
of the
saved the
answer to
money
that.
And we saved the money from Alex. So it
We
seemed
did.
like
That's
we
the
did
other,
save
yes.
money on staff expenses.
I would like to point out, we cut staff last budget.
Yeah,
We cut our assistant minister position. And quite frankly, that saved us $13,000 coming into this budget. And that was a huge help to be able to meet some of the priorities that we wanted to meet this year.
Also,
As tough a decision as that was, it was the fiscal prudent thing to do.
oh,
So Kathy, I'll need to
Yeah.
get that figure for you. I'm not sure. Rosalie?
This budget minister's salary is only for 11 months. That's why it
Correct.
looks like less. It's only 11 months. So,
Right.
okay.
Ann?
Does the developmental minister get sabbatical? Or is that $1,000 that you give to the UUA Developmental Ministry Fund?
That's correct. Because the developmental minister is only with a congregation for a shorter period of time, that it's not our obligation to pay a sabbatical to the developmental minister. And it's the obligation of UUA. And that's why that $1,000 is in there. That's correct.
Right.
Edith, I wanted to make sure that you had a chance to say something if you wanted to say something. I know you can't raise your hand.
No, I don't have anything particular to say that hasn't already been covered. I certainly hope we can make this work, and we'll see what we get from the developmental minister. I assume he will be able to help us in some kind of way. I don't know, education or I don't know what, but I'm looking forward to seeing what he'll bring with him.
Thank you,
I
Edith.
know, I was looking at his website or whatever, and after talking with him, when he was a minister at his previous congregation, they increased growth of the congregation, and by increasing growth, they also increased income from pledges. So hopefully that will be the case, when we'll see.
When the search committee was looking at different candidates, one of our #1 priorities was that they would take a very active role in stewardship. And he's very, very dedicated to making sure we manage stewardship ministry. It's one of his priorities. Hello,
think,
Elizabeth.
One of the things that he did before we even asked him was volunteer not to take what was recommended as far as expenses go. And he said that he was actually very frugal. So hope that's true.
Yes, the full-time staff giving up some of their professional expenses includes Reverend Tim giving up some of his professional expenses, willingly offering it up.
I have a refugee welcome committee, so I'm going to say goodbye. Thank you so much,
Okay, hope you
everybody.
feel better.
Oh, yeah, it'll pass.
I'm gonna head out too. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Thank
Bye,
you.
Marlene.
Yes, you all did a good job. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, Elizabeth. When did you show up?
I wanted to get your numbers up and I realized it's not 7, but I offered to Airbnb some 95-year-old lady and she hadn't shown up, but I don't even know where to look for her. So there you go.
I wanted to say one thing before I left too, because I have been absolutely thrilled with Kay as treasurer. She has been doing a great job. She's frankly much better at communicating this stuff in a way other people can understand than I could ever be.
I know, Stan, you thought we couldn't replace you, Stan, and there you go. There comes Kay being different.
I was really hoping we could replace me.
Wait. Pedestals are hard things to fall off of. I just want y'all to know. So
No,
you're
you're
not
doing-
putting me there. And the only way I understood some of this budget was because of Stan's assistance. So let's be honest. And he's only a phone call and an email away. So I appreciate that.
Right. And back to the rest of Finance Committee too. I'm really glad they're all still there because they certainly know what they're talking about. So I felt perfectly comfortable stepping back and letting you take the reins, and you didn't need me for much of anything really. You understood what I was talking about fairly quickly.
Good job. Cut this thing off. You can't have a
we
white
done?
paper last more
Okay.
than an hour.
Thank you, everybody.
Yep.
See y'all later.
Thank
Pam,
you.
you want to
See you
stay
later.
on just a bit?
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
Good work. Thank you.
You.
Thank you for being here, Edith. I'm gonna turn off the recording.